My name is Emily, and this story happened a few years ago when I was 24, living alone in a quiet suburb outside of Portland, Oregon. I had just landed my dream job as a graphic designer and rented a small but cozy house. The neighborhood was charming, with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved when you passed by. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, or so I thought. It was late October, the kind of crisp autumn evening that made you want to curl up with a blanket and a good book. My home was decorated with pumpkins and string lights, and I had just returned from a Halloween party hosted by my coworker. I was tired but in good spirits. As I kicked off my boots and locked the door behind me, I had no idea that this would be the last peaceful moment of my night. The first unsettling moment came when I noticed my living room window slightly ajar. I always kept it locked because it was old and creaked loudly when moved. Shrugging it off as something I must have overlooked in my haste to get to the party, I locked it and pulled the curtains shut. Still, a small chill ran down my spine as I double-checked all the windows and doors. Satisfied that everything was secure, I made myself a cup of tea and settled onto the couch. The house was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Halfway through my tea, I heard a soft tap, tap, tap. It sounded distant at first, almost like branches brushing against the siding. I ignored it, chalking it up to the wind. But the tapping grew louder, more deliberate, as if someone was knocking. Not at the front door, but somewhere along the side of the house. I froze, my heart racing. My phone was on the coffee table. I grabbed it, debating whether to call someone. But who? The police? My best friend? I decided to investigate instead. With my phone's flashlight, I crept to the front window and peeked out, seeing nothing but the dim glow of streetlights and my neighbor's jack-o'-lanterns flickering on their porch. The sound stopped. Relieved but still uneasy, I went to my bedroom and locked the door. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after a long day. I was drifting off to sleep when the noise started again, louder this time. Not a tap, but a distinct scratching like nails dragging against the wood. It came from the back door. My stomach sank. Someone was trying to get in. I bolted upright, grabbing the nearest object for protection, a heavy metal flashlight. My fingers fumbled as I dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was outside my house. They assured me that an officer was on the way and told me to stay hidden. I turned off all the lights and crouched behind the bed. My breathing was shallow, every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. The scratching stopped, replaced by the unmistakable sound of a doorknob rattling. Whoever it was had moved to the front door. Then I heard it, the sound of glass shattering. They were in the house. I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the living room. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. I gripped the flashlight tighter, trying to steady my trembling hands. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. A shadow appeared under the gap, and then a soft knock. "I know you're in there," a man's voice called, low and menacing. I pressed myself against the wall, my mind racing. The police would be here soon, I told myself, just hold on. The knob jiggled, then twisted. When the door didn't open, he began pounding on it, shouting obscenities. In a surge of adrenaline, I yelled, "The police are on their way! Get out now!" There was silence, followed by the sound of retreating footsteps. I didn't dare move until I heard the distant wail of sirens. Moments later, the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the front yard. They searched the house but found no one. The intruder had vanished into the night, leaving behind muddy footprints and a broken window. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The police never caught the man, and I eventually moved to a new apartment with better security. To this day, the sound of scratching on wood or rattling doorknobs sends a chill down my spine. That night changed me forever. It made me realize how vulnerable we are, even in places where we feel safest. And though I've tried to move on, the memory lingers, a reminder that sometimes the monsters aren't hiding under your bed. They're standing right outside your door. It was a typical October evening in Willowdale. a quiet suburb known for its tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. I had just returned home from my late shift at the diner, exhausted but relieved to finally kick off my shoes and sink into the familiar comfort of my living room. My small house on Maple Avenue was my sanctuary, modest but cozy, filled with hand-me-down furniture and photos of happier times. The kind of place where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. The autumn air was crisp, and the faint scent of wood smoke wafted through the open window. I brewed a cup of tea, wrapped myself in a thick blanket, and settled on the couch to binge-watch a true crime series. The irony wasn't lost on me. I enjoyed scaring myself in the safety of my own home, confident that the horrors on the screen could never touch me. Around 11 p.m., the soft hum of the neighborhood began to fade. Lights in the houses across the street winked out one by one, and the occasional bark of a dog or the rustle of leaves was the only sound. I was about to doze off when a faint knock echoed through the house. It was so soft at first that I thought I'd imagined it. I muted the TV and listened, my heartbeat quickening. Then it came again, a deliberate, measured knock, this time louder. My pulse thudded in my ears as I approached the front door. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing but the dimly lit porch and the empty street beyond. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. No answer, just the eerie silence of the night. I locked the door and checked the windows, trying to shake off the unease that crept up my spine. It was probably a prank, I told myself. Kids being kids. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense that something wasn't right. An hour passed, and I'd almost convinced myself to let it go when a loud bang rattled the back door. I froze, clutching the blanket tightly around me. This was no prank. Someone was trying to get in. My phone was on the coffee table, and my hands shook as I dialed 911. "Someone's trying to break into my house," I whispered to the dispatcher, giving them my address. They assured me that officers were on their way, but the thought of waiting terrified me. Another bang, harder this time. I grabbed the only thing I could think of, a kitchen knife, and crouched behind the couch, trying to steady my breathing. Through the crack in the curtains, I saw a figure move past the window. Whoever it was, they were circling the house, testing the locks. My chest tightened with fear. Then came the sound that made my blood run cold, the jingle of keys. Somehow they had keys to my house. The back door creaked open, and heavy footsteps echoed through the kitchen. "I know you're in here," a man's voice called out, calm but menacing. "Come out, and this doesn't have to get ugly." Panic surged through me as I realized I'd forgotten to lock the basement door. That's how they'd gotten the keys. I'd left the spare on the shelf in the garage. My own carelessness had let them in. The footsteps grew closer, each one deliberate and unhurried. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear the pounding of my heart. The glow of a flashlight swept across the living room, and I flattened myself against the floor, clutching the knife with trembling hands. "I know you're scared," the voice said, now closer. "But you're making this harder than it needs to be." A shadow loomed over the couch, and I bit back a scream. In a split second, I bolted, knocking over the coffee table in my rush to get to the stairs. The man shouted, and I heard him give chase. My legs felt like lead as I stumbled up the steps, adrenaline the only thing keeping me moving. I locked myself in the bathroom and braced against the door, gasping for air. My mind raced, searching for a way out. The small window above the bathtub was my only hope. I climbed onto the sink, struggling to unlatch it as the man pounded on the door. "You can't hide forever," he growled, his voice muffled but furious. Finally, the window gave way, and I squeezed through, scraping my arms on the frame. I landed awkwardly in the bushes below, pain shooting through my ankle. Limping, I ran toward the street, praying I'd find help. The sound of tires screeching made me turn, and relief washed over me as a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers jumped out, guns drawn, and stormed into the house. Moments later, they emerged with the man in handcuffs. His face was a mask of fury, but his eyes were filled with something darker, something that made my skin crawl. As they loaded him into the car, one of the officers approached me. "You're lucky," he said grimly. This guy's been breaking into homes all over town. We've been after him for weeks." I nodded numbly, unable to speak. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and I couldn't stop. The tears that spilled down my cheeks. That night changed me. My house no longer felt like a sanctuary, and I could never again hear a knock at the door without a shiver of fear. The man had been caught, but the memory of his voice, his footsteps, his shadow, those would haunt me forever. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I've always lived in a small house in the suburbs of Chicago, a busy city, but at the same time, quiet, where you can relax after a long day of work. My name is Sarah, and I'm a taxi driver. It's not my dream job, but it pays the bills and lets me live on my own with a sense of independence. I like the peace my house offers, the predictable routine, and the safety I never imagined losing. The house I live in is in a residential neighborhood with tree-lined streets and simple houses. I've always felt comfortable there, surrounded by friendly neighbors with a sense of normalcy that reassured me. The neighborhood had never had any major problems. No significant crime, no break-ins, at least not until that night. It was an ordinary Friday. I finished my shift as a taxi driver around 2 a.m. The traffic was quieter than usual, and I was ready to get home, take a hot shower, and crash into bed. Nothing seemed more important that night. I was tired, but happy to finally rest. When I got home, the living room light was on, which surprised me. I was sure I had turned everything off before I left. I thought it was just one of those moments where you forget something. I didn't think much of it, closed the door, and quickly entered. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt strange, almost tense, heavy. I was about to head to the bathroom when I heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It was a low sound, but loud enough to put me on alert. Something wasn't right. I was sure I was alone in the house. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the sound repeated. I slowly approached the kitchen door, trying not to make any noise. My mind raced with thoughts. Maybe it was an animal trying to get in or a neighbor who had confused my door with theirs. But the sound was coming from inside, from someone rummaging through my house. Someone who shouldn't be there. With my heart pounding, I grabbed my phone from the table next to the door and sent a text to my friend Dan, who lived 2 blocks away. I was too nervous to call, but I needed some reassurance. He responded almost immediately. "Relax, Sarah, it's probably just some random noise, don't panic." But it was impossible not to panic. The feeling of being watched, of something being wrong, was unbearable. I swallowed hard and took a step back. The kitchen door still ajar. I didn't want to go in, but I didn't know what to do. The feeling of vulnerability was stronger than any rational thought I had. Then I clearly heard it. The doorknob in the kitchen turning. It wasn't just someone lightly touching the door. It was someone trying to get in. My body froze in fear. Without thinking, I ran to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. My phone trembled in my hand and I immediately called the police. Time seemed to stand still as I waited for someone to answer, and the seconds dragged on. 911, what's your emergency? Someone is in my house. My voice came out muffled, as if I had lost the ability to speak properly. I was instructed to remain silent, not make any noise, not move. They told me a patrol was on the way, but it would take a few minutes to arrive. Time felt like an eternity as I listened to light footsteps, as if the person was trying to be quiet, but couldn't completely hide the sound. I knew something was wrong. The noise in the kitchen had stopped, but now there was the sound of furniture being dragged in the hallway. I was in a panic. The feeling of being invaded, of having my most intimate space violated, was overwhelming. I had never felt so fragile, so powerless. I tried to stay calm, but the thought that someone could be inside my house trying to find me was unbearable. Every sound, every small noise seemed to amplify my distress. Then the door to my room shook. It wasn't just a tug on the doorknob, but a punch, a strong, determined impact. The door didn't give way. but the sound was enough to freeze me. In terror, I knew I couldn't just stay there waiting. Without thinking, I grabbed the first thing I found, a knife from the drawer beside my bed, and prepared for whatever was coming. There was no escape. With every passing second, I felt the intruders' presence more strongly. They were somewhere getting closer. Each step I heard seemed nearer, more threatening. Then suddenly a glass shattering. Someone had broken the living room window, probably trying to break in through the side. The sound of glass breaking made me jump, and panic spread through my body like an electric current. I crouched in the corner of the room, the knife in my hand, ready for whatever would happen. My phone was trembling in my hand and I started hearing voices. It was hard to distinguish, but I could clearly hear, "She's somewhere here, let's find her." The police arrived within minutes, but by then I was already in shock. They arrested two men. One of them looked no older than 20 and the other an older man with a hollow expression. Both were armed with tools to break into doors and windows. They had tried to enter my house through various points and were hiding when the police found them. I didn't know who they were, what they wanted, but one thing was certain: I had narrowly escaped. When I finally spoke with the police, what haunted me the most was the fact that they never found any reason for the break-in. There were no signs of theft, no threatening messages. They didn't know why they had chosen my house. I still wonder what happened that night. Was it just an opportunity for a random break-in? Or was there something more they were looking for? In me? I don't know. What I do know is that I never felt safe in my own home again. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear those footsteps echoing in the hallway and the memory of the doorknob turning. They may have left, but the fear never left me.